Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to be a continuation of a previous lesson from the 9th chapter in the book of Ecclesiastes. We made it all the way up till the 12th verse. We're going to take this 13 all the way till the 4th verse in the 10th chapter. Now, what we read of is of life in light of death, or what we're going to review. Then the section we're going to cover today is the compares and contrasts the relative merits of wisdom and folly. And it does so via a parable and then proverbs. We'll explain what those are when we get there. But for now, we're going to begin our review. He says in verse 1 that the righteous and wise and their deeds are in the hands of God. But we are nothing special if we are righteous or wise, because we read in verse 2, it is the same for all, one event to the righteous and the wicked, to the good and the clean, et al., etc. He proceeds to list a series of synonyms about which basically conform to righteousness and wickedness. But whether we are good or bad in this life, we all die. We all must die. We all must face death. And part of wisdom consists in preparing to die, because if you are not prepared to die, you cannot be said to be prepared to live. He says this in verse 3. This is an evil in all that is done under the sun. There is one event to all. Truly the hearts of the Son of Men are filled with evil, and madness is in their hearts while they live. And then to the dead. This is a grim prognosis, but an accurate and honest one. He considers it an evil. Death is an evil. It is his number one dread. He is writing in the twilight of his life, and the inevitability of death haunts him and frightens him. So he describes it as evil. He's writing as if there is no life after this life, though at certain parts he does voice the perspective of the secular humanist. But he describes universal depravity. Top to bottom, human society is littered with bad people, evil hearts. Our hearts are deceitful, desperately wicked, and incomprehensible, according to the prophet Jeremiah's diagnosis in 17th chapter, 9th verse, in the book which bears his name. But just evil and madness, these are two unpleasant emotional exponents, or madness is just the deranged state of mind that we collectively, if not individually, certainly fit that description, as do evil. Now, some people are more evil than others, of course, and not everyone is evil, but everyone does have at least a trace of evil in them. And then, of course, but we all die. So, what is the point of living righteously if you cannot prevent the day of your death? What is the point of living with wisdom if the wise and the fool meet the same fate? For the living know that they shall die, but the dead know not, nor do they have any more reward, for their remembrance is forgotten. That's verse 5. So as Solomon sees it, you're dead and that's it. Existence ceases. Death is not extinction. Death is not annihilation. Death is not the end, but a beginning. We know this from the Judeo-Christian perspective, but he is writing as a radical critic of his Orthodox Judaism. So he does ultimately bring himself to a faithful conclusion, but while he's experimenting, and he does dabble in this state of the school of thought that this life is all we have, and there is no incentive for making the most of it while we are here. If we are carnal creatures, then our sole purpose for existence is to consume and enjoy. And he comes close to saying that, but not quite, in verse 7. Go eat your bread with joy and drink your wine with a glad heart, for God has already approved your work. This is not the philosophy or the mantra of the Epicureans, eat, drink, and be merry. For tomorrow we will die, but God is in the picture. God has to be at the center of the gratitude. God makes the difference in the eating of meal. Food just ain't the same if you don't pray your way in. And joy is distinct from happiness. Happiness is fleeting. Happiness is dependent on external circumstances, but the joy that one who is submitted to God brings transcends all circumstances, and it does make the heart glad. Drink wine, all things in moderation, unless you are an alcoholic, in which I can only recommend complete and total abstinence. So he is not the loose, licentious Epicurean model, but he has it all in perspective. And the idea that God has already approved your works is a comforting and assuring one, because earlier he expresses one of the things he finds futile is the work, the whole being driven to achievement, what it had all gotten to him. But the fact that his work, what he does, is approved, does make a difference. So he does have a somewhat positive evolution as he goes from talking about death to talking about life. It says this in verse 9, "See life with your wife, whom you love, all the days of your futile life, which he has given under the sun, all your days of futility, for that is your share in life, and that is your toil in which you have labored under the sun." Life is futile, it is meaninglessness, it is purposeless, but having a wife, a married partner with whom you can share love, it really does make life happy. It doesn't provide meaning or purpose necessarily, unless your wife is your soulmate. But while you're here, you may as well enjoy it. You can have temporary relief from the vanities. You can escape the perplexing dilemmas by being lost in love with a woman that you love. And it's this life one is given under the sun. It is given. Life is a gift. So even though it is somewhat of a curse according to his vantage point, at least in certain perspectives, in certain locations, it is a gift. And God's generosity is the outstanding contribution in the book of Ecclesiastes of his description of God and what our share in life. Our share means that it does not belong to us. Nevertheless, we are entitled to enjoy our share, our portion of it. Portion and share are synonymous. And toil, now the work once more is already approved, so the toil is the actual sweating as opposed to the end result of work. But if you labored, if you worked for it, you earned it, and if you earned it, you are entitled to enjoy it. But to have greater gratitude for the gifts than the giver is tantamount to idolatry. Verse 10, "All that your hand finds to do, do it with your might, for there is no work or planning or knowledge or wisdom in the grave where you are going." May as well get it out now, because you will never have a second chance. There is no planning or knowledge or wisdom. Our existence cease. Our souls eventually degenerate into dust, seemingly. But he's saying, go all out, spare no expense in any endeavor. Make the most of the time while you are here. Plan away, achieve away, acquire success, accumulate wealth, and accumulate wisdom and knowledge, and make these fantastic plans for the golden age of an empire. And then, not long after, he was dead, like everyone else. Then verse 11, Darwinian biology teaches survival of the fittest, but he notices a discrepancy in that. The race is not always to the swift, nor the battle to the mighty. Look what happened to us in Vietnam War. We were militarily superior by every quantifiable measurement to the native resistance of a driven people, fiercely protective of their homeland. And all these things. So time and chance meets with all of them. That is the controlling element of the mysteries in life. Time and chance, we are all at the mercy of them. They are all mysteries, and it could happen to anyone. So even those who have the most advantages in life do not necessarily end up with the most. Verse 12, "For even man does not know his time, like fish taken in an evil net, and like birds caught in a snare, so the sons of man are snared in an evil time, when it comes down on them suddenly." Man is the dominant species in the food chain, yet he describes us as hunted creatures, and like fish being taken in a net, or birds caught in a snare is a hunting device. So too are we snared and trapped by death, because death, it comes to us all. Much as the fish, their life ends when you get it in the net, and then they can't breathe water anymore. Bird caught in a snare, not necessarily fatal, but once they're dead, they're dead. And so too is it with man. Man has no advantage over the beast. The wise have no advantage over the foolish, and the righteous have no advantage over the wicked, seemingly. Lesson itself, verse 13, remember this opens with a parable. A parable is an instructive illustration which uses relatable scenery from everyday life or commonly observed natural phenomenon to express and illuminate didactic truth. So didactic has a moral, so what are we taught to look for the moral in the story? Not every story has a moral, so if there is no moral imparted in a parable, it is not a parable, it is definitionally something else. And we're most familiar with the term from the New Testament, and the master is considered the father of parables. But there are some parables in the Old Testament, in as early as the book of Judges, and we read one here. Also this I saw as wisdom under the sun, and it is great to me. This was no idle boast. He was the greatest in wisdom. He is the pinnacle figure in the Hebrew wisdom tradition. He was a sage king, the personification, embodiment, and actualization of the Platonic ideal of a philosopher king in whom wisdom and power were united as one. And the East philosophy is a distinctly Western term, the Eastern equivalent of which would have been sage. So he was a sage king. He was a purveyor of wisdom, and he was the creative inspiration of 3 books in the Bible. So his sagacious sayings are found in Song of Solomon, Proverbs, and Ecclesiastes, respectively representative of chronological stages in his life. So with the old adage that with age comes wisdom, then Ecclesiastes is certainly his masterpiece. A little city and a few men in it, and a great king came against it and besieged it and built huge siege works against it. This actually corresponds and aligns with what we reviewed in verse 11, that this city was small, there were not a whole lot of people in it, and the forces, the army aligned against it was great, and there was this tiny little city with this great king coming to conquer it and besiege it and sack it and claim it as his own. And he meant business, because he built these, he spared no expense in the equipping of siege equipment to tear the city's wall down, but he was thwarted by the unlikeliest of characters. And there was found in it a poor wise man, and by his wisdom he delivered the city, yet no one remembered that poor man. So Solomon says in the 19th chapter of the book of Proverbs that the poor is a man without friends, or even the very friends of the poor flee away from him. It might be verse 4 in that same chapter, but he writes this as an observer of poverty. That is something he never experienced. He was, in addition to being the wisest man who ever lived, he was also the wealthiest. So, but he with him, wisdom and riches and all these things were combined. But wisdom is not the exclusive monopoly of the old. It is not the exclusive monopoly of the rich. It is not the exclusive monopoly of the educated. Wisdom is found in the unlikeliest of corners, much as Christians often are. So this poor wise man, he had no dignity, so to speak, because he was, but nevertheless, by his wisdom. Now, his wisdom was not an academic wisdom. It was a highly practical, strategic, prudent, and pragmatic type of wisdom that saved the city. So we want to know precisely the type of wisdom that he speaks of here. It is not the wisdom to write the book of Ecclesiastes, but to save a city from a military aligned against it with every quantifiable strategic advantage against it. So that is a testament of ingenuity and wisdom. Yet the tragedy of it all is that even though he saved it, he was forgotten, neglected by posterity and his contemporaries. So in his own life, he was not remembered. The ingratitude must have been insufferable, to be the cause or instrument of a city's deliverance, and to remain despised and poor and neglected and not be rewarded or not be remembered. That is a shame of all shames. Now, this story could have happened, but it is a fictitious but relatable story. So even though the events in parables often didn't happen, they are communicating truth, nothing but, in them. And I said, wisdom is better than might, but the wisdom of the poor man is despised, and his words are not heard. The superiority of wisdom over weapons of war are alluded to in the 8th chapter somewhere, and also here again. Wisdom can do a lot more than any nuclear bomb or any firepower. To have the brains, war is not won by brute force, but by brains. So wisdom, to have a strategic genius for a general is better than having the most well-equipped army in the world. But if you are wise and you are poor, you remain despised because you are poor, not because you are wise. And the reason that you are not treasured, valued, and esteemed as wise is because no one will know that you are wise if you are poor. You do not have the resources to have a voice. You do not have, you are neglected and despised and obscure in the eyes and estimation of the world. But once more, wisdom is not the exclusive monopoly of the rich, the educated, or the powerful. The words of the wise, spoken calmly, should be heard rather than the shout of a ruler of fools. Wisdom is soft-spoken. It does not suffer from the odd compulsion of the fool to advertise who it is. A prudent man is content to conceal knowledge, read in Proverbs 12:23. But the heart of the fools proclaimeth foolishness. So wisdom is content to content to know that it is. It doesn't care who else knows it. They know that they are wise, and that is sufficient for wisdom to not have to show off or boast or go on these foolish escapades comparable to the fool who, testament to his foolishness, is only advertising exactly how foolish he is to any and all in earshot. The words of the wise mean something. The words of the fool, they're words, but they don't mean anything. So gravitate, pay attention to the wise. We have a chorus of competing voices literally clamoring at us across for our attention. Fools, power is dangerous in the hands of fools. Nevertheless, many foolish people did occupy kingly positions throughout human history. That is the flaw of hereditary monarchy. So power is dangerous in the hands of a fool, but it is safe in the hands of the wise. Wisdom is better than weapons of conflict, but one sinner destroys much good. So even all the wealth and all the wisdom and all the weapons, one little ripple effect sin can destroy a whole lot of good. But once more, the superiority of wisdom as a resource to be utilized at a king's disposal in times of emergency and in times of war, wisdom is going to serve him better than any weapon can. But the danger is that sin has a ripple effect. Look what happened to the nation of Israel when Achan did what he did in the 7th chapter of Joshua. He hoarded some of the booty for himself in express violation of the commandment, and the whole community suffered because of his sin. So sin has a destructive effect. It destroys the individual. It destroys society. It is the microcosm and the macrocosm are very much mutually reflective in the equation. 10th chapter. Now this is a 20-verse chapter. We're going to take it all the way up to the first 4 verses. And these are Proverbs, and some of what we came before were Proverbs, but we are going to define it since we neglected to do so, perhaps when we should have. A proverb is a concise saying of condensed wisdom. They really pack a punch. They cultivate what the author Ernest Hemingway called the iceberg effect. The composer of Proverbs must say much while appearing to say little. So an iceberg, what lurks below is always substantially larger than what can be seen on top. There's really an economy of words, and they are intended to inculcate correct behavioral standards, but also to impart wisdom. That's more the book of Proverbs. The Proverbs that we read of in Ecclesiastes, we also read some in the first 14 verses of the 7th chapter. But he says this in verse 1, "Dead flies make the perfumer's ointment stink, ferment. A little folly outweighs wisdom, esteem." As an intelligent man, he regarded the fool, the presence of the fool, the existence and the activity of a fool as an unpleasant odor. Foolishness just stinks. So a little bit of folly, even in a wise person is destructive, and it is obnoxious and it is odorous. So a little folly can do much damage, much as one sinner can do much damage to entire communities. So too can a little folly. So too can all the wisdom in the world not compensate for folly at a little time. Now, even wise people do foolish things, but in the moments when they do those things, they cease to be wise, at least temporarily. In wisdom, remember, Solomon is looking for some permanent satisfaction. In wisdom's impermanence, he is convinced that all the thinking and existence and activity dies when you die. But we forgot what we were saying about permanence. But a wise man's heart is at his right hand, but a fool's at his left hand. In the Bible, the right and left are acceptable and rejectable, such as we witness in the Master's parable of the sheep and the goat in the 25th chapter in Matthew. The sheep, the saved, the Christians, the saints, they are on the right, and the goats, the wicked, the unrepentant, and the reprobate are on the left. And right and now this great minds and defective minds think alike, which is why we have conservatives and liberals respectively. Liberalism is complete foolishness. Now I want to read to you something that I wrote in a separate essay, just an excerpt from it, a window into liberal logic. Now let us try to make sense of some of these senseless tenets of liberal logic, which is Luciferian. A pattern of hypocrisy, hyperbole, and inconsistency will emerge. These axioms of empty air will pop as easily as balloons, under even the least rigorous of scrutiny. Let us examine some of the ways liberals think, though thinking, in all fairness, is far too generous a description of their cognitive processes. Let us proceed to examine some of the logical absurdities many of their rank and file abide by. You're too old and too white to run for office, unless, of course, you're a Democrat. My opinion as a woman only matters if I'm a Democrat. Death penalty for babies is part of women's rights. Death penalty for sadistic murderers is abhorrent. Science is king, except for that one lesson in biology regarding identifying sex as male or female. That's not accurate at all. Life begins when they say, and chromosomes don't matter. Global warming is settled science, but a fetus is not alive. They just can't kill enough babies. Gender is fluid, climate is not. Gender is an arbitrary societal construct, but Hillary must be elected because we need a female president. Feminism and transgenderism are mutually contradictory, as are Islam and homosexuality, as we're going to get into eventually. A man can never understand a woman's perspective on abortion, but he can become a woman. Gay marriage and abortion are in the Constitution, while the right to bear arms is not. If two people want to get married, it's none of your business. However, if two consenting adults agree to wage for services, it is your business how much said wage should be. Christians are out of line for saying homosexuality is a sin, but Muslims throwing homosexuals to their deaths off of buildings and cranes are just practicing their peaceful religion. Gay marriage will have zero impact on you. Now bake a wedding cake or get sued for all you have worked for. Molesting kids is okay, even poignant and funny, as long as it's same-sex liberal molestation. The religion of preference is Islam. The favorite special interest group is the LGBT community. It does not matter that support of the first would result in the eradication of the other. That's just liberalism's pathetic attempt to be all things and all people. They embrace mutually contradictory things such as Islam and homosexuality and transgender and feminism. If Christians would just learn to coexist with the peaceful Muslims, they wouldn't be beheaded. It's the Christians' fault because crusades. The Bible is completely irrelevant and absolutely false. Until someone hurts their feelings, not very hard to do if you're a liberal, then God is love and judge not. Atheists who claim God does not exist believe he will be the end of civilization if we worship him. To adhere to liberalism is to abide in consistently inconsistent, mutually contradictory logical absurdities. Every single day is opposite day, where ignorance is enlightenment, slavery is in freedom, war is peace, men are women, and vice versa. Those who enforce the law are the real criminals. Illegal aliens are the real Americans. And my personal favorite, innocent, upright, conservative, patriotic pedestrians minding their own business are fascists who we must bully for the sake of liberty, tolerance, acceptance, and free speech. Liberals, in summary, are a walking encyclopedia of self-contradictions. When viewed logically, their entire existence is a lie of collective distortion and a sleight of hand, meaning they are witches. There are mental disorders that prevent the ability to learn. Handicaps are medically legitimate. Liberal logic, on the other hand, is not a disorder. It is a system that perverts the lessons of life and alters it according to what they want rather than what is. That makes it a species of self-selected retardation. Liberalism is distinct from normal retardation in that it is a matter of choice. Liberalism is a species of mental retardation that is distinct from excusable retardation, and that the latter can't be helped. But liberals choose to act in a manner which renders them indistinct from normal retards, and in that their retardation is entirely inexcusable. I realize that some people are born retarded, and I neither wish to appear insensitive to the fact or for using the R word in a way that is malicious to those in actual handicap, but those who abuse their God-given agency for self-centered, self-interested, individual selves and gathered among the like-minded and mobs. The type of retardation I speak of, aka libtardation, can be helped, but for reasons unbeknownst to me, they choose to be retarded. I don't have a whole lot of positive things to say about liberals. I'll refrain from sharing my commentary on special selected Democrats out of respect for the principle of if you don't have anything nice to say about someone, don't say anything at all. And that is more out of the respect for the principle for them. But liberalism is foolishness, objectively speaking. No Christian can make the claim that Christianity is compatible with liberalism. And with scientific certainty, I can claim this as fact. No one ever became a liberal by reading the Bible. You have to go to school for that, for the brainwashing. Verse 3, and also when a fool walks along the way, his heart is lacking, and he shows everyone that he is a fool. A liberal, like a fool, is pretty easy to spot. The three telltale signs are dressing like a freak, thinking like a moron, and acting like a coward. But a fool, once more, they can't help themselves. They are just so foolish, and testament to their foolish nature, they suffer from the odd compulsion to let everyone in the room know, everyone who sees them know that they are foolish. So you can spot a fool from right away. They are loud, they are obnoxious, they are obtrusive, much like liberals. But you know, the fool is ultimately a heart problem. It's not a mind problem, it's a heart problem. They lack the heart for intellectual advancement. They are carnal creatures, and you know, they just can't help themselves. Look at me, I'm a fool. What are you going to do about it? If the spirit of the ruler rises against you, do not leave your post, for calmness lays to rest great faults. He's advising his socioeconomic underlings to let their employers be rude to them, and you know, don't protest it, don't resist it, don't oppose it, don't resent it. You know, stay calm and learn your place, and with your calmness, you can overcome your socioeconomic superiors' lack of decorum. So you know, he's saying it's part of the job because they have burdens and responsibilities, and sometimes they do take it out on their underlings. You know, we've all had unpleasant bosses. This is something that we can relate to, and the timeless wisdom of Ecclesiastes, written some 3,000 years ago, is alive and relevant in any and every generation. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're here. Stay tuned until next time. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.